And we are back here live from the Tunbridge Fair in beautiful Tunbridge, Vermont, for a debate between our main candidates for Lieutenant Governor. David Zuckerman is an incumbent. He is the progressive from Heinsberg, and he is joining us this morning along with Don Turner, the House Minority Leader. And gentlemen, I want you to just describe a couple of the rules of the debate. We're going to ask questions. Colin Mine, my colleague here from BT Digger, is going to be taking turns with me asking you questions. You're going to get a 90-second answer, each of you, to the same question, and then we will follow that up with a 1-minute rebuttal from the person who was first asked the question, and then move on to the next question. We're going to do this in sort of 4 broad sections of topics here for the debate. We're going to cover the economy in the first section, education in the second, the environment in the third, and some miscellaneous questions in the final section. And I would invite you also, I'm going to try to leave time at the end of each of these segments for you each to ask each other one question. So actually, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Don Turner go first and ask David Zuckerman a question after at the close of the first segment, and then at the close of the second segment, Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman will be asking Representative Turner a question. We'll just go back and forth like that. At the end of each segment, there'll be one question between the candidates, and again with a 90-minute response from the other, and a 1-minute rebuttal from the person who asked the question. So we're going to get started here, and I want to ask my good friend Colin Mine to take the mic, and I think he has an opening question.
So I think the lieutenant governor position in a lot of people's mind is a fairly ceremonial position. Both of you have spent months now campaigning for it, and possibly will spend the next 2 years doing the job. I'm wondering why you think this is an important position, and why you think you'd be the right person for the job. Don, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thank you, WDEV and Dave, for having us on this morning. I think it's a great opportunity for people around Vermont to see us. I think the Lieutenant Governor's job is a very important position in Vermont, and that it gives Vermonters an opportunity to come in and convey their concern with what's going on. If they're not getting a response from their legislator, from the governor, whatever, I want the Lieutenant Governor's office to be an open, collaborative place where members of all parties can feel welcome to come into that office, working with me to help them convey their message throughout state government. The other thing that I find about the Lieutenant Governor's position that I think is very important, and why I'm choosing to run, one of the main reasons I'm running is, we have an imbalance in Montpelier of the majority has for a number of years, has had a majority in the legislature. We need to have some balance. I've worked for 13 years, 6 years, 7 years as a leader to try to restore that balance and bring in more Republicans to the House. We did that in 2014 and we picked up 8 seats, but I've still found that I've done all I can to sustain defense. By moving into the Lieutenant Governor's office, it will give me an opportunity to have a seat on the Committee of Chairs, where I can assign chair people to each committee in the Senate, as well who sits on those committees. Also, presiding over the Senate would give me an opportunity to bring a much more moderate view to what's being legislated, and finally to be the person that casts the final vote, or the tie-breaking vote is very important.
All right, David Zuckerman.
Well, thank you, Dave and Colin and WDEV, as well as the Tunbridge Fair. This is always a fun kickoff for the fall campaign, which is really when it gets going. Most Vermonters are ready to not have politics during the summer and get into it here in the fall. It's been a real honor and pleasure to serve, and I want to thank the voters of Vermont for giving me this opportunity for the last 2 years. And it's interesting to hear my opponent's answer because, frankly, that's exactly what I've been doing in the Lieutenant Governor's office. I've had open coffee hours, bringing people in from across the state so that they feel welcome in the State House and can participate in the process in a way that sometimes folks don't feel like they can when money is sort of the driving force in a lot of politics. I've also extended a newsletter out to Vermonters across the state, to tens of thousands of Vermonters, to bring them into the process, to welcome them with more information. And I think it's also really important to make sure people understand the position of Lieutenant Governor. Serving as Lieutenant Governor, it actually isn't about partisanship one way or the other. It's not about balance, meaning 50% of one party or 50% of another. It's actually being more of a town moderator and being much more neutral than providing a balance on one side or the other. When you're running the Senate, you need to make sure that all senators have an opportunity to speak, and all of their amendments and positions are offered fairly and within the rules, and having the respect of senators across the aisle with respect to running the Senate, which is the number one sort of official job of Lieutenant Governor. But traveling the state, bringing people into the process has been a real pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again.
All right, and we are going to go now to a second question here, which is, do you support, and I'm going to ask this Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman first, do you support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour? If so, how would you resolve concerns about the benefit? If not, how do you persuade low-wage workers to you've got their backs?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I've supported raising minimum wage for all of my 20 years in public office. The reality is working people have fallen behind while wealthy people have jumped ahead over these past few decades. And while it's great that wealthy people are making more money, working people are struggling to get by. And raising minimum wage is a fundamental way to help working people earn more so that they, like everybody else in this state, can provide for their family and have a little time for their family instead of having to work 60 or 70 hours a week. With respect to the benefits cliff, there's a lot of work being done, and there's no doubt that is the challenge. And for those that don't know what the benefits cliff is, as some people earn more money, but they're also getting supports from the state, it turns out that if they earn more dollars from work, they actually lose yet more benefits from the state, so there's a disincentive to work more. The reality is, as more people are working and our economy grows, we'll actually have the money to fill in the benefits cliff so that we never have that disincentive moving forward, and working for honors could do better. I also just want to point out there's a myth out there that the minimum wage primarily applies to youth in their jobs. Well, that was the case 20 and 30 years ago. Most people working minimum wage jobs are single women and older folks and working age people who are trying to pay their bills. And it's not a training wage, it's actually a job that they're trying to have.
Okay, any rebuttal, Don Turner?
The only concern that I point out that there are many businesses that would suffer in this case, and Vermonters are getting, we can't forget that Vermonters are getting a minimum wage increase every year. So I want to point that out, that these are issues that are very difficult to balance, but every Vermonter that is receiving minimum wage is getting a pay raise every year under current law.
Okay, we're going to go to a next question from Colin Mike.
Another issue that was front and center of the last legislative session was paid family leave, giving workers automatic, allowing them to continue receiving salary if they have emergencies in their family, if people get sick, this sort of thing. I'm wondering what you think about that law, whether you support it, and what you think its prospects are in the next legislative session.
And that question is to...
I'm going to start with Minority Leader Turner.
Okay. I support paid family leave that works for all Vermonters, not mandatory leave, but only works for some. The proposal that came forward last year was a mandatory paid leave that would have raised payroll taxes by over $16 million. I support going to a more voluntary paid leave plan, such as New Hampshire is exploring now. This would allow Vermonters that want paid family leave to opt into it, and those that don't would not have to opt into it. At this time, I don't feel there's any way that we can burden all Vermonters with this brand new payroll tax of $16 million.
Well, I do support paid family leave, and the world of voluntary entry is a wonderful way to phrase things, and it sounds really great. But the bottom line is, paid family leave doesn't work unless you have enough people involved. And we're talking about pennies on a paycheck. And if we combine raising the minimum wage with paid family leave, Vermonters would definitely have more money in their pockets, and folks wouldn't have to decide between keeping their job and caring for their ailing parent, their ailing spouse or child. And we should be, this is one of the key policies, and it's broadly supported by the vast majority of Vermonters. This is a key policy towards bringing younger people into Vermont, where they know that they could work in Vermont and they would also have a secure situation if they had somebody that's sick in their family.
Folks, I apologize for that phone dialing in the background. If listeners can hear that, certainly our participants can hear a phone beep dial And I want to also tell folks that I think that is happening somewhere in the Tunbridge Fair phone system here that we are hooked into. So that's the way that goes. Any rebuttal, Don Turner?
No, I think I made my case. I think that people that want paid family leave should be able to opt in, but I think people that would be charged double should not have to pay double, and that we should look and explore, as New Hampshire is, in a voluntary opt-in paid family leave program.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to ask the next question, which is research by the Vermont Futures Project shows that Vermont needs about 11,000 more workers annually to meet workforce needs. Help wanted ads abound. What are your suggestions to increase the workforce? I will start with Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman.
Well, I think there's a number of challenges. First of all, rural areas across the country are struggling to keep young people, and that's one of the large demographics that you normally have in your growing workforce. And so sometimes people say regulations are in the way or policies are in the way in our state government, but if you actually look at rural parts of this country, whether blue or red in terms of policy, they're struggling, just as Vermont is, to have enough workers to fill the jobs. One of the things that I think is really important to actually help draw people to Vermont is our incredible school system. And we really do have high quality outcomes relative to small rural areas across the country. And sometimes our school systems come under attack from leadership or from those that want to attack it. And that really doesn't persuade people to come to Vermont. Our broadband needs to be expanded, and that will attract people to Vermont to be able to live and work in this state. Our higher education system needs support so that people move here to go to school will also then stay and fill those jobs, which is actually one of the things I did. And I did start a small business. I want to go back to minimum wage for a minute and point out that while there's discussion that minimum wage is going to hurt small businesses, when people earn more money, they're going to buy more from our businesses. And sure, it's going to be a struggle, but if the minimum wage goes up incrementally, as is in the bill and in the law that the governor vetoed and my opponent objected to, we would actually see those folks having more money in their pockets to spend on our small businesses.
All right, Don Turner, you're answering this question about bringing more workers to Vermont.
So as I've traveled around the state, and I've heard from many Vermonters who are struggling over the growing cost of living, I think that expanding the economic growth to all Vermonters and making sure that the state is affordable is the key issue in this election. We need to rein in taxes and fees. They've been out of control for years. We need to take a serious look at Act 250. I know there's this committee going around looking at Act 250 reform, but if we're going to really reform Act 250, we've got to look at some of the burdens that are being placed on developers as they go through this process with no predictable outcome. You know, if we're going to boost affordable housing, open up healthcare competition, we can only do it by lowering and lessening the impact of regulation on people that are investing in our state. Finally, we need to make sure economic growth is spread to all 14 counties. What's needed in Colchester is not necessarily what's needed here in Tunbridge or in Cabot. As your new next Lieutenant Governor, I will focus my efforts on building bridges on these crucial issues, expanding our economy across the entire state.
Okay, I want to ask.
Is there a rebuttal opportunity?
Yes, I want to ask Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman for his rebuttal.
Well, just briefly, people have gone after Act 250 for a very long time. We're sitting right here in Tunbridge, where Act 250 would maybe well have been the tool that would have protected this community in this rural part of Vermont from a massive, massive development that would have completely changed the nature and culture of this community. Thankfully, that developer has pulled the plug on that proposal. But 90%, more than 90% of Act 250 applications are approved very rapidly. And that has been actually a very good process to make sure that as development happens, it happens the right way. When there was the big recession, Vermont did not tumble like many other parts of the country because we are smart about our development and we take our time.
David, that's
to
not
bring
true.
the community
That's
in.
not true at all. The process is totally broken because it's not predictable. 90% of the permits get passed because they're amendments to pre-existing permits. We have Act 250 in the state. I'm a developer. I support Act 250, but today it's become a leverage mechanism for people who are opponents of the project. It's not working today the way it was intended, and I am a supporter of that.
Let me go to our next question, Colin Martin.
As we continue on the theme of economy here, affordable housing is another issue that has emerged, particularly well, in all areas of the state for different reasons. I'm wondering what you would do to expand affordable housing. What sort of initiatives you think could be undertaken to make Vermont more affordable?
Can I start?
That's for
Sorry, that starts with.
Thank you. As a developer, I've built hundreds of affordable housing units in my community. And as I said, I think it piggybacks to what I just was responding to. Act 250, as well intended as it is, and it's done a great job for the state, but it's also driven up the cost of housing around Vermont. I can talk to any developer, and David could too if he opens about that. He would hear people saying, developers are not opposed to Act 250. They're opposed to people leveraging the appeal process to essentially blackmail or hold up a project. That's what's driving up the cost of housing in Vermont. We need to work with communities and developers and all stakeholders to build more affordable housing. But you're not going to do it as long as one person can hold up a project for years and years and years. And when developers put up a project and it takes 2 and 3 years to get through because of these different hurdles, it's not going to ever be affordable. As I said, I've developed hundreds of projects. I've worked with nonprofits to do housing in Milton with CHT and so on. I know how to do it. I know what it takes, and I would, if I was elected lieutenant governor, I would make sure that those bridges are being built instead of used to hold back development.
You've got like 20 seconds here. Can you just explain sort of how you would prevent these projects from being blacklisted without sort of taking away the voice of local communities?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So there has to be an appeal process for sure, but I think that the person appealing or the entities appealing the project have to have more than just I don't like the project. So there has to be some criteria that would have to be used to block a project, not just I don't want that in my backyard.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Well, I just want to make it clear that there's no Vermonter that has a card that says I get to block a project. There's a process, and there's the Act 250 board and the regional commissions that review those criteria that do exist. And I'm really glad, of course, that the legislature has put together a commission to review and look at this across the state and look for those changes. Having been in the legislature for 20 years, we've reviewed Act 250 numerous times, and the conclusions do actually, this is true with Republicans involved, Democrats, progressives, that major changes to Act 250 are not necessary. Sure, we can look at it and make adjustments as the times change. With respect to affordable housing, there's some real opportunities. First of all, I applaud the governor's initiative a couple of years ago to invest, take a bond out and invest, I think about $36 million in housing across the state. I think it's important when that happens because it's a fairly standard tactic to borrow money from the future to deal with the present. Republicans love to borrow money instead of paying for things as we go. But that will certainly build many, many units across the state. We also have a very stable population. So why don't we look at the housing we already have and make sure it's being used properly? We used to have families that were 8, 10, 12 people in a house, and we used to have much larger families. A lot of those families could have an opportunity to make some income in their houses throughout the state. I would also add Home Share Vermont is a phenomenal program. We have an aging population. They're living in their homes. Having someone live in that home help pay for some of the amenities or some of the taxes and provide housing for families or young start couples is another opportunity. So, I think it's important to bring folks in. I have to give a little pushback on the open up my ears comment. I'm not really sure where that came from. And that my office is incredibly open. And we've taken hundreds of calls that people made to the governor's office, didn't get responses to, and called my office for help.
I'm going to respond to that already.
Yes, I think that David's office is open, but it's very partisan, and I would change that. I would absolutely change that. I've served in the House now 13 years and seen where the office can be used to be more open and collaborative and not so partisan. I also want to talk a little bit about, David brought up the minimum wage a number of times. Raising the minimum wage has proven there's data that shows that it could have a negative consequence on the economy. Cost thousands of jobs and really harm people that are going to work and want to go to work will be harmed by this. So I feel that what David's saying about housing ties into the minimum wage because we're not going to be able to build affordable housing unless we do it through nonprofits and we have a good portfolio of nonprofit affordable housing that exists today.
And Don Turner, the minority leader of the Vermont House, do you have a question? We're going to wrap up our economics segment here. Do you have a question for Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman?
Yeah, David. There's been a lot of talk about a carbon tax over the last few years. My question is simple for you. Would you support in any form a carbon tax here in New York?
Well, actually, I've been clear about that for a long time. I support a conversation about it. We have an incredibly large hurricane hitting the Carolinas and Virginia. My mom and sister live in Virginia, so I'm thinking about them this morning. And, we obviously were ravaged by Hurricane Irene. And we have to think about diversifying our energy and renewable energy throughout Vermont, but also looking at our transportation. And frankly, if you look at the actual proposal, again, beyond the tax sound bites that some people use, when you look at the proposals that are out there are adjustments in those proposals to make sure rural Vermonters and low-income Vermonters get extra rebates to cover those costs. So when people use scare tactics to scare rural people and scare low-income
So
Vermonters,
David, how are you going to explain to those people that put gas in their car every week, how they're going to pay that extra cost of that gas?
when they get money reduced on their taxes.
So they get taxes, tax return once a year.
Is this an on back and forth, or is this a response to a question?
Let's let Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman finish his answer.
So, we have to make sure that whoever is in the highest offices in the state of Vermont don't use sound bites and political rhetoric to scare people. The job of governor, lieutenant governor, and other officers state law is to make sure that we bring all the different voices into the conversation and all the facts into the conversation and let Vermonters have a fair conversation. One of the things my opponent also talked about with respect specifically to the minimum wage in my office and partisanship. I have a weekly FaceTime conversation for half an hour. On the minimum wage, I had proponents in for one half an hour, I had opponents in for another half an hour. The bottom line is, if my opponent wants to make charges about partisanship in my office, I would hope he would back it up with some facts, because what I've heard from most people is that this office is more open than it's ever been.
Already, a rebuttal from Representative Turner.
Sure. I feel strongly that we have to deal with this issue, that we will move forward, and that I, if I'm elected as Lieutenant Governor, will be open, collaborative. I think
This question was about the carbon tax.
and the carbon tax. Yeah, I was getting there, David. Thank you.
So you're talking about the office of lieutenant governor.
No. Well, you brought it into that, so I'm going to bring it back. But the carbon tax is my concern as I travel around the state. People can't afford to go to work every day. They can't afford more taxes on gas for their cars, diesel for their trucks, or home heating fuel, and that's what carbon tax will do.
Okay, we are going to go to a brief break here on the Dave Graham Show. We'll be back with more of our debate in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to go back to the debate now and moving on to education policy. I've got a question that I want to put to Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman first, and it goes like this. Vermont's student body has been shrinking fast in recent decades, with already high staff-to-student ratios growing. How do you see us addressing this? Is more distance learning a possibility? If students have to travel longer distances to regional schools, what about advantages of teachers who perhaps couldn't have classes in one school in the morning and another in the afternoon?
Well, I think it's actually a great topic, because the rhetoric around school spending has focused on attacking teachers, and that's not the way to go. The place where spending has gone up tremendously is actually in social services in our schools. I actually met with the governor and proposed working with him on really investigating our human services budget and our education budget, and working to bring them together when it comes to serving the kids in our state. We could reduce the duplication of services that our schools are spending and our human services are working on with some of these kids, and we could actually create a better continuum of services. Unfortunately, the governor's office chose not to reach back to work together in that regard. But the long run is to really bend the curve on that education spending. Isn't about cutting teachers, and it's not about closing our small schools. It's actually about reducing our duplication of spending in the social services arena. You talk to any superintendent or principals, and you look at those budgets, that's where the spending increases have been. So let's look to tackle that. It's not a one-year solution, maybe not even a 3 or 4 year solution. But if we try to do 1 year, last-minute solutions as have been attempted by the governor and the Republicans in the legislature for the last couple of years, we're not going to actually address the real problems, and we're going to hurt our schools. Vermont has a great reputation for our schools We have a great blend of public and choice school scenarios. And we need to maintain that and actually use that as an element to draw people to Vermont. Continually attacking our schools is not the way to go.
And Representative Turner.
You know, we have a strong education system in Vermont, but the way we fund it doesn't best serve the needs of our students, teachers, and taxpayers. You know, we have seen a very stagnant student population, as you mentioned, Dave, and it's steadily declining. But what's more concerning to me is the students' outcomes. What students are receiving is getting less while we're paying more. We need to invest in innovation. We need to spread out support to higher education and early care so that our dollars go further, more part of the student's life, so we can spend those dollars across all of education. We also need to look at cost reforms. I've been a major champion for cost containment. I'm a big supporter of teachers, but we spend too much on schools. I think David brings up a point. We are doing social services in schools, but if you look at what our schools are, the cost of our schools are doing in the last 10 years, it's not sustainable. We need to find efficiencies. I think some of the things that you pointed out, using teachers at more than one school, using technology to support the kids, and having a teacher teach in one school and having them receive in other schools is very important. But we also cannot ignore, and we need to be more supportive of school choice and the independent school community, who are often far ahead of the game with innovation in the classroom. So those are how I would tackle this issue.
Well, interestingly enough, I think the issue of having teachers working in the schools is important, and that's actually one of the goals of Act 46, which will allow smaller school districts to share some teachers across two different districts next to each other when they used to be independent districts and they'd be independent contracts, and teachers had 0.4 and 0.6 positions and would often leave an area. So I absolutely agree that that's one of the things that needs to happen. And that's one of the results of Act 46, which I wasn't a part author of on the Education Committee. I know there's some challenging communities out there. We need to continue to work to make sure the opportunities we put in Act 46 to make sure those isolated districts have an opportunity to not merge if they've gone through the whole process, which is written in the law, and we're going through that process. But for many other districts, we've actually made that opportunity to share teachers much better. So that's a key piece here.
All right, we're going to go to Colin Mine for the next question.
Thanks. I was hoping we could bore in a bit on education taxes. Obviously, last year was perhaps one of the main conversations during legislative session. The Democratic Party brought forward an ambitious proposal to really overhaul the sort of spending calculus at the beginning of the session. That didn't get very far. The governor also has proposed spending thresholds as well as staffing ratios. So I guess when we talk about cost containment, I'm wondering if you can talk about specific proposals that you would support as far as how Vermont can change the way that it pays for schools. We're going to start with Minority Leader Turner.
Sure. So we mustn't forget that 70% of Vermonters already have their income tax based on their property tax is already adjusted based on income. So the solution of paying for schools is not going from property tax to income tax. Vermonters already know that taking money from one pocket or the other still costs them a lot of money. So my ideas on schools, we have many bright people working in the Vermont school system. Some of the things we talked about, consolidation, that works in some ways. David talked about Act 46. I supported Act 46 as well because I thought there was a lot of good things in Act 46. But cost containment was the main reason I voted for it. The bottom line with it is it has gone through 2 years of implementation and it's been positive. There's been millions saved. But we're at this point where there's some school districts that are going to be really hurt. And I think that we need to stop right now, as I think I agree with David on this, that there are some districts like Franklin, for instance, that had the best student outcomes 2 years ago and received the award from the Department of Education. They were spending 10% less than the neighboring districts, but they're now going to be forced to close. That's not what was intended when I voted for Act 46, and I hope that we can fix that going forward.
I just want to make sure that the rhetoric doesn't get ahead of the facts here. No district, no school is being forced to close. There are administrative consolidations to Act 46, but not forced closure, so that's nowhere in the bill. And in terms of saving money, there's a couple ways. One, I actually went into quite some detail on where the agency human services budget of $2.4 billion in education, about $1.6 to $1.7 billion. A large number of those dollars is around social services. And I don't think that the way the state tells schools, or should tell schools to save money, is by a state mandate on your student-staff ratio, or should say to the voters of communities who I trust, who support their schools with 96, 97, 98% of the budget's passing, and all of a sudden the state is going to start telling our local schools how they're supposed to save money. Where the state can get involved is with the state dollars that we do contribute into the system. And that's why I would say rather than telling our local voters who have supported their schools, we know better, we're going to tell you how to operate your schools, we're going to tell you what programs you have to cut, that you have to cut teachers or services. We should actually say, let's work with our schools and our school boards and our human services agency and education agency to look for where we can find those efficiencies in the social services side. That is by far the many millions of dollars that we talk about. And finally, just one last piece on taxes. Yes, 70% of Vermonters pay based on income. 30% do not, and those are the wealthiest Vermonters. And they pay a lesser and lesser percentage of their income towards schools than hard-working Vermonters. We want to save Vermonters who are working hard every day some money, have the wealthier Vermonters pay based on income as well, and it would lead to about a $30 billion savings for average
Rebuttal from the minority.
I disagree with David on that. I think that we are, as I said, we're already overtaxing. The cost of living in the state is growing faster than people can sustain it. So shifting the burden instead of containing the costs and finding efficiencies in the system, this is the way I want to approach this. Not finding more money to support an unsustainable cost that we are facing in the state.
Next question. Some Vermont schools have been criticized for not doing well with increasing racial and ethnic diversity of their students. The ACLU, for instance, has pointed to tougher discipline against students of color for similar infractions to those committed by white students is helping to create a quote-unquote school-to-prison pipeline. What can be done to address this issue? I'll ask first Lieutenant Governor.
Well, there's no doubt this is a huge challenge, and in the Senate Education Committee we've heard from the ACLU and many others about this incredible disparaging situation and just different numbers of people of color who are disciplined, expelled, and detained much more so than their white counterparts. And we have to get into the schools with some, first off, surveys and analysis of why this is happening, whether it's the social services, whether it's the teachers themselves or the principals that have these implicit biases. But we have to determine that, and then we also have to make sure that we then give proper training so we all understand the biases that we have. Everyone sitting here today is not in the community of color, and that's true across 95% of Vermonters are not. And we have to own our implicit biases, both as individuals, as school leaders, as teachers, and make sure that we have programs in place to awaken us and change how we address those issues in the schools. And you pointed out that the school-to-prison pipeline. Our prisons are also filled disproportionately with people of color. This is far beyond our schools, but it starts in our schools, it's society-wide, and we all have to step up and really analyze how we are holding biases that we don't even know we have. And we have to make sure our laws in the criminal arena and the criminal justice arena also are applied fairly and equally and not disproportionately.
I think we're going to go to a brief break here on the Dave Graham Show on WDEV and ask Representative Turner, Minority Leader Turner, to respond to that same question in a moment or two. Could you repeat the question? Sure. It was some Vermont schools have been criticized for not doing well with increasing racial and ethnic diversity of their students. The ACLU has quoted tougher discipline against students of color for similar infractions to those committed by white students as helping to create what we call a school pipeline. What can be done to address this issue?
So, first of all, I firmly support the rights and equality of all Vermonters, and we have worked hard in Vermont to address this issue. I want to touch at the state level. Last year we passed a bill and we created a new commission racial equality and so on throughout the state. The commission is going to be charged with many of these aspects that you've already approached, being equal to all of Mars. But I want to talk about on the local level what I've been doing. Consulting as a town manager, I've been working closely with the coalition who's focused solely on racial equality in the schools. We have been working for the last 7 months, actually from November, December, through the early part of the year. Now we are working with the school districts. So I'm meeting with the coalition, superintendent, and town manager. We're working together to address this issue. We have a lot of work to do in Lincoln, we do in the state, but working together across all stakeholders is the way to do that. And I will continue to fully support that.
Okay, we're going to go to a change in topic now. Just as we do so, I want to punctuate the debate here once again with a couple of words. One is that we want to thank our underwriters, the Central Vermont Chamber of Commerce, Children Down Plastics for their helping us to put on this debate here at the Tunbridge Fair. And I also wanted to mention our podcast once again, WDEVradio.com is the website. Go there, follow the link to the program, so scroll down and you will find recent broadcasts of our programs. So you know that and say, what did the lieutenant governor say, or what did Representative Turner say? You can always check our podcast later on and find out what the words were. So we want to continue now with some questions about the environment, environmental policy that I want to ask Colin Lyman to step in there and question.
So before we move on to the environment, Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman, you have an opportunity to ask the minority leader any questions, please.
I think it was related to education aspect, and maybe follow up on that topic. Don, you've indicated you don't seem to want wealthy people to pay the same proportionate share of income towards our schools as working people who are getting working Vermonters a $30 to $40 million tax break. You've indicated that you want to cut spending in schools through your service, and I think and the cost of schools, which I think is noble when you want to make it efficient. But I haven't really heard specific proposals as to what programs you would cut, what adjustments you would make, and how those would change the outcomes. Because Vermonters actually are getting much better outcomes than similar demographic districts all across the country for the money. And so, what are you going to do to actually improve that when it's a real challenge with rural districts?
Well, I think that we have some challenges because of the rural settings of our state, but we have to do that. We can't increase taxes without consequences. So I will continue to fight for that and work with the schools and the government and the legislature to do that. Some of the specifics that we talked about, we sort of talked about earlier, was efficiencies, using teachers. We have in Montpelier High School, and we have 32 assistants. If you have 6 students in Montpelier and 5 students in Montpelier, why couldn't one teacher work with 3? So we have to do that. And unfortunately, the only way is that we go to work with the legislature and the commissions in the past to make that happen. So that's one way to do that. Another way is programs. We need to start, as I said, start teaching our kids, investing in our kids earlier in life. So we spend $1.6 million in our pre-K program. We need to start spending some early education and higher education. We can't do that if we're going to keep letting the cost of things. So that's what I would focus on. Working with teachers, because teachers have the answer. I don't think people like myself and the legislature or using things on the environment have all the answers. It's working with teachers, it's working with stakeholders to come up with a plan that works. And I want to do that. I'm committed to doing that because I believe in Vermont and I want to do it for them.
And as minority leader, did you meet with teachers and ask them for those ideas? Because I haven't heard from the teachers union.
That was a response to that.
Well, I guess it's interesting after a decade in the House and talking about this and generally attacking the cost of teachers in our schools. I'm curious about your relationship with the teachers when you tend to attack them all the time. How are they going to really feel welcome to work with you to find those solutions? I think what we need to do is stop attacking people. What we're seeing nationally is attack the other person, and then somehow say, let's then work together to find a solution.
Yeah, I disagree.
I think we need to stop attacking people.
I disagree.
And actually need to work with people.
I disagree with you. I have a very good working relationship with the teachers that I know. I get a lot of ideas from them. At the NEA, it's been very hard to work with. And as a minority leader, my role was always to play defense. The majority would not accept our proposals, so we were constantly playing defense.
All right, we're going to move on to the environment here. And start off with a question about renewable energy. This question is going to go first to the minority leader. Vermont is, according to anyone who's looking into it at the moment, slipping on its progress toward the goal of 90% renewable energy by 2050. Should the state consider mandates if the gap widens between its performance and that goal?
No, I didn't support the 90% goal. I didn't support it at all. I think that's and as I said, this campaign is about what it costs to live in this state. We artificially set these benchmarks in the legislature, and I didn't support it. I can't support that. I do support renewable energy. I do support moving in that direction, but I do not support the 90%. It's too high.
All right, Blake. Hold on, I'm just putting my sweatshirt
What do you
away.
think is a more realistic target, if not 90% by 2050?
I think that we should be looking at 50 and 75%.
Oh,
On mandates, do you think that if you lower the goal, you support mandates
well,
to
because
achieve
she
that
has
goal?
about 5
I would
minutes.
entertain those. Without specifics, I'm not going to say I would support one more or oppose that, but I definitely would be open to that. I just think that we lose sight of what it costs to live in this state, and we have to start focusing on that. And we set these benchmarks which are admirable, and I understand why, but I don't think they're attainable. And at this point, I think so.
Lieutenant Governor.
Well, I think it's incredibly important to have a vision of where we want to go. I do support the 90% renewables by 2050. Let's remember, that's 32 years from now. 32 years ago, we were in the late 1980s. If we don't think we're going to have the technologies able to implement 90% renewable over the next 30 years, given the progress that's been made on efficiency in solar panels, efficiency in wind, including in smaller wind, which I think a lot of them would support more small turbines in their communities, then we're really being short-sighted. You know, Vermont is an incredible state that has had vision about equal rights for our gay, lesbian brothers and sisters. We've had a vision about working people, getting a fair shake in the workplace back from our grant workers and the unions. Vermont's always been about the vision of where we want to be. And to why would we short-sight the vision of where we want to be? We want to have renewable energy. We want to have diversified energy so that we're not dependent on single large plants that can be wiped out in the larger and larger storms that are coming, and are only going to get worse in the future, especially if we don't move towards renewable energy. And finally, I would include that because Vermont has invested in renewable energy, we have moved over the last 20 years from one of the most expensive power grids in the world to one of the least expensive, which when people want to talk about attracting young people or attracting business, most businesses actually look at energy costs and workforce before they even look at taxes. And so the fact that our energy costs are better than most of the world because we've invested in renewable energy is why we should keep it in.
I'll note before passing the mic to my co-host here, Jake Graham, that we're going to cut out the rebuttal portion of these answers so that we can cover a bit more ground before this debate wraps up.
Thanks, Donald. And I want to ask the next question of let's go to Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman. We'll start out with your answer. Do you support building both large and small scale wind and solar and other renewable energy facilities provided for its input from local communities and natural resources?
I do, and I have for a long time. You know, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and like 2 years ago, when this president got elected, I thought about two things for her future: the Supreme Court, which we're now seeing shift radically to the right, and probably going to take away some of her reproductive freedom, and climate change, and the future of her life over the next 50 to 60 years. And anybody who says, well, we're too small to make a difference, is forgetting the fact that each one of us can make a difference. Every single Vermonter makes a difference in our neighbors' lives every day, and every single Vermonter makes an impact on our lives every day. And if we can make the impact in Vermont, make our footprint smaller, we need to do so. So we certainly have to include input from the local community, and we also have to look at where it's practically viable. There's been people saying, oh, there's going to be big wind turbines on every single ridge in Vermont. That is categorically untrue, because most ridges in Vermont aren't actually suitable for wind energy. I also supported back 25, 30 years ago, maybe 25, when Mayor Burlington said, let's consider wind turbines on Lake Champlain. The reality is, wherever the wind works, we should consider it and have that community discussion about our future. I just installed solar panels on a building on my farm, trying to offset some of the incredible energy costs that farming has. We each have to do our part, and we have to do it as a community and individually.
Representative Turner.
Yeah, so I do support both large and small renewable projects such as wind and solar, but I absolutely think that locals have the right to be heard and be part of the process. I think that's what's caused some of the biggest debates in the state in the past. I have a large-scale wind project that affects local members. It has not affected me. I support it. When you're in Milton and you go in the store, one person in front of you will say they support it, and the person in front opposes it. So I totally recognize that it's still very controversial and many people get upset about it. But what we have to do is be proactive. We have to look at these things to improve our state and our grid and so on. But I do think without local control, we are really hampering the amount of government and I fully support them as long as we restore that control.
All right, and we are soon going to be running out of time on this environmental and especially the debate. So, Representative Turner, do you have a question on the environment for Lieutenant Governor Huffman?
David, could you tell us how you feel about funding for clean water?
Absolutely. I took a great phone call from a constituent who was really frustrated about the sewer overflows that we're seeing in the news all the time with these heavier rains. And he was incredibly upset that the municipalities are allowed to dump into the water. And the reality is we passed legislation a few years ago, I think it was fairly universally supported, to make sure that those dumpings were publicized because they'd actually been going on for decades. And I talked to this constituent about it, and I said, you know, one of the challenges is we have this old infrastructure, and it would cost millions and millions of dollars to fix that infrastructure and to support farmers creating larger buffers on their fields and to look at our highway and transportation systems, which are also cleaners of our water. And right now we're debating in the legislature, if we want clean water, it's going to cost some money. You know, I don't know your income, I said, but and he said, I make $17 an hour. It's only $34,000 a year. It's an average struggling Vermonter to pay their bills. And I said, well, the debate in the legislature right now is whether everyday Vermonters can pay $20 or $40 a year in order to have clean water. And he laughed. He said, is that all it would take? He said, I struggle, but I would happily contribute $20 to $40 to do that. And that's what the legislature talked about a few years ago. It's what it talked about recently. And there are folks who in the legislature were a roadblock to paying for cleaning our water. And, you know, I do support it.
And Representative, the response to this question.
Sure. My feeling is that we have to absolutely do something about clean water in the state of Vermont. I mean, we have taken a comprehensive look at it. But my concern is that farmers are being notified of what's happening with their water. When we read week after week, one family or another just dumping millions of gallons of sewage into the lake, we have to be able to focus on where these sources are sooner rather than later. I'm actually fed up with hearing that it's farmers' fault that this is happening. I think the farmers are making great progress towards improving their operations, and we've seen this improving over the years. But one thing that people used to have in the legislature is bigger and bigger setbacks from water. I was with a farmer last week. They were going to lose an entire cornfield over 200-foot setback. So I want to work with farmers, with Vermonters, and we've got to focus on the sewage that we need.
I'm going to shoot facts around. There's nobody saying farmers have to have a 200-foot setback from getting crops near water. A 200-foot setback from stacking manure near water. But that's different than the other road crops.
All right, we are going to take a brief break here on the Dave Gordon Show at WDEV. Be back with more of our debate in just a couple of moments. And we are back here at the Tunbridge Fair, and so glad to be here this morning at a debate between Minority Leader Don Turner, the Republican from Milton, and Dave Zuckerman, the Progressive Lieutenant Governor from Tunbridge. And we've been through really good sports so far. We're about to go to our miscellaneous subject line, and we're going to make this a bit more of a lightning round. We're going to cover some ground. not really lightning. We're going to trim it to a minute though for you gentlemen, and we'll try that so we can speed through some of these questions a little more. And I believe the first question goes to my good friend Colin.
Right, and this question is going to go to Minority Leader first. Given the Lieutenant Governor's important role in managing the legislature and how the legislature operates, I wanted to ask about the sexual harassment policies in the Senate and the House. At the moment, the policies are very close to the public. There's very little transparency in how complaints are dealt with against actual legislators, and it's up to the fellow legislators to decide whether or not to move forward with any complaint, to take any sort of action, and that action, unless it moves into other agencies, is often also close to the public. So I'd like to know whether or not you think that these policies need to change, and if so, why.
So the answer is yes, I think they need to change. I work closely with the Speaker in the House, and we work on the rules committee to come up with more stringent policies that are in the Senate. The way I like to do that is working with the Senators to explain to them we need to be transparent. As legislators, as leaders, you have to lead by example. And we have to come up with a policy that addresses this, is transparent, so people know what happens and how it's going to
Well, I'd be curious to look really at the specific language again, because it is very clear what the process is. We have made it so that someone who feels as though, and actually I'm not a member of the Senate, so that's one of the things that I think the Lieutenant Governor, my opponent here is not aware of, is that we don't set the policies for the Senate. The Senators set the policy, just the Senate or the House of Representatives set the policy for encouragement. So, and absolutely, and encouraging it is important. And the Senators created a program where not only is there clear guidelines, but there's also liaison. So someone can go to an advisor and ask questions about how their situation is dealt with before making an accusation or setting out something that happened, to make sure that there was a process to make sure that they are protected as the victim, as well as the process is protected. But certainly, if there is an outcome that needs to be made public, if someone has sexually harassed somebody and there is a determination that there's been a violation, that needs to be made clear to the public. And then the voters can decide what to do with that person based on their conduct.
That's what we did.
Thanks, Colin. I wanted to change the topic a bit here and ask about the gun legislation that passed this year. And I want to address this question to Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman. The Second Amendment advocates seem to regard the limits on magazine sizes as the most onerous and odious of the firearms restrictions passed this year. Would you support a move to repeal those limits?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I could talk more about it, but it sounds like a yes or no question, and no, I can not. The reality is, folks for hunting and for sport, don't need 20 and 30 rounds in a magazine. And also to protect themselves from an intruder, you don't need 20 or 30 bullets in your magazine. And so I think, like 2/3 of Vermonters who supported the legislation that the governor signed, I too supported that legislation out and proud to stand with him as we protected Vermonters from scenarios that could be dangerous, and we also allowed Vermonters to continue to have the weapons they need, hunting and recreation protection. The bottom line is, we look at the one of the number one cause of death for women. It's from violence and domestic assault, often perpetrated with guns. Some of that legislation also included the fact that our law enforcement, if they entered a situation like that, could protect those women and temporarily confiscate those firearms. That is solidly positive legislation for Vermont. 2/3 of Vermonters supported, and I would not propose to translate.
Representative Turner, what do you thought on this?
I did not support S55, and I would consider repealing of it. It's not going to be one of the things I focus on, but I would look at that. Vermont has one of the lowest crime rates in the country. One of the things that was concerning to me was that we need to focus on the root cause of the violence, not just the machine, the tool, the gun. We in Vermont, this legislation passed $5 million for school safety. In Milton, as town manager, I have my police officers, my patrol officers at the schools during pick up and drop off every day, each day of school. And that has made great improvement in those kids feeling safer, parents feeling safer, and I think that we need a much more collaborative than just taking a piece of legislation like this that we don't realize. There's a bigger picture, a bigger process, and that's what I focus on.
Next question goes to Colin Live.
This is going to go to Representative Turner first. In a matter of weeks, Vermont's out-of-state prisoners, about 260 of them, will head to a private facility in Mississippi. This is instead of the governor last year briefly proposed a plan to hire a private company to build a prison in Vermont. That didn't get anywhere, so they continue to move around the country. Do you find that to be acceptable? Do you think it has to change? And if you do, what do you think can be done to bring prisoners back to Vermont?
So I think we have to continue the process with the government and out there for prisoners going out of state. Again, the government proposed building the facility. It was not going to receive it. We didn't have the resources to do it. I don't think that's going to be feasible in the short term. So I would continue supporting prisoners in the United States. We would also continue working with advocates to look at ways to deal with disciplinary offenses and so on, as we've been doing for the last several years in the legislature, to prevent people from being put in jail.
Well, first and foremost, knowing that's what's going on in Mississippi, it's very clear that recidivism rates, meaning people returning to crime, unfortunately, after they get out of jail, is higher when you don't have regular contact with your family and other support networks that you're going to be coming out to when you get out of prison. You know, it was never designed to have people go into prison and stay in prison for the rest of their lives. In fact, we still have low-risk offenders in prison nowadays. We look at trying to reduce how many are in prison and look at the ways we can incorporate them back into society and help them with their drug addiction issues or the other base causes as to why they're in prison in the first place. I was just talking to a friend of mine whose spouse is in the chicken correction facility, and she pointed out 70% of the women, over 70% of the women in jail, are there because they suffered abuse in domestic situations or became addicted to drugs and then did something that led them to be in jail. We need to address those root causes of domestic assault, of drug addiction. We need to put tremendous resources, as I would from cannabis reform, for instance, into drug treatment and particularly opioid treatment, so that we don't have people ending up in jail when they could actually be productive members of society, filling those 11,000 jobs that you talked about earlier in the show.
Next question comes from Dave Brown.
Speaking of cannabis reform, actually, Vermont's current marijuana legalization measures by the state's Vermont's current marijuana legalization measure, which, for example, allows people to grow their own pot and possess, has some internal logical problems. Should it be modified, repealed? Should Vermont move to a fast and regulated marijuana market?
Well, I've advocated for a long time for a well-regulated marketplace for cannabis. The reality is it is all over the state, has been for decades, and it's been a wild west. You don't know where to get it, you don't know people selling it, don't check the road because of age identification. We should have a regulated market, and weaker than that, that should include local co-ops, so that the current local growers who are generally still underground, still illegal, could actually supply a reasonable small marketplace locally. People would pay their fair share of taxes, but we would have a regulated marketplace. We would get rid of those strange scenarios that we have with the quote DC libertarian model, where you might have more than you can use. Well, what do you do with that? Right now you can gift it, but it's likely that some are selling it to their friends. There's still no testing lab to do that. Think about alcohol. You know the percentage of alcohol in your drink, whether it's beer, different types of beer, wine, stronger drinks. You know how much to consume when you're drinking so that you're not unsafe or losing your mind. Right now, cannabis, you don't know what you're doing. We should have a regulated market. It should be well regulated. It would actually boost tourism, it would boost the economy, and we should move away from this middle of the road system.
Minority leaders, sure.
Yeah, from my perspective, as long as it's legal, we should be legalizing it the right way. And I firmly believe in a strongly regulated market. And we can redirect the tax revenue intervene, for prevention, public health, and enforcement efforts. So, I opposed legalization for many years. Now it's the law. I understand that we have to do something to strongly regulate it. And I've worked with Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman on a plan to do that. But I believe that strong regulation at this point is the future.
I just want to make something clear with respect to working with you on that. We did offer an amendment, and my colleague pulled back from offering it at the last minute, so I'm not sure how working for 6 weeks to come up with an amendment with leadership from all sides of the House, and then pulling back from that is in the end effective. It could have been in place this year had Matt Twain continued to work with that.
Well, that's not necessarily true. The Speaker actually pulled back. Lieutenant Governor knew full well that the Speaker wasn't going to support it. And I was pulling back. Just for the record.
Okay. Well, I think, unfortunately, we are out of time for that segment of our debate, and we move now to, well, actually, I do want to ask, let's see, Representative Turner, I think it's here, to ask a question of
David, in February 2009, the heart of the Great Recession, you introduced a bill in the Vermont House, H177, which would raise income taxes on the middle class Vermonters making as little as $47,000 a year. At that time, why did you sponsor this bill, especially in the middle of the recession? And do you regret introducing it?
I'll be perfectly honest, you're asking for a 9-year memory of what the context of 177 was, and so I'm not really sure exactly what the topic was related to. Was it education spending? Was it to put money towards low-income support for housing? When in the recession, people were having a hard time with housing. If you could give me a little context.
Have you ever opposed
I don't support raising taxes that are regressive. The taxes I've supported raising make it so that people who are earning more pay their fair share. Ever since Reaganomics, there's been this mythological belief that if you give millionaires more money, somehow working people will end up better off. We've seen since Reaganomics that that's not true. The folks working in minimum wage jobs are worse off than they were in the 80s. Folks that were in manufacturing jobs are worse off than they were in the 80s. The idea of giving wealthy people more money in order to somehow have that trickle down has never happened. Our economic system is a sponge up system. So I believe that, yes, government has a role, that when we all work together to pay for our roads, to pay for the infrastructure that our businesses use to make money, that they also ought to contribute to make sure the working people who are working for those businesses get paid a fair wage and have the same opportunities as everyone else.
All right, we need to go to closing statements right now, and I would invite Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman to go first. You have 90 seconds.
Sure. Well, thank you again for hosting this debate on David Collins, WDEV, and of course the Tunbridge there. It's been an incredible honor, and I want to thank the voters of Vermont for giving me the opportunity to serve for the last 2 years as a Democrat. I've taken the job very seriously, both from the official duties as moderator of the Senate, making sure all voices are heard, but also the other aspects that are sort of intangible. And that includes really opening up the office of Lieutenant Governor. I've told legislators and groups from across the building and the state they're welcome to use my office if they're in a meeting room, because of course the State House has very few meeting rooms. I've invited folks in for coffee hours. We've had a FaceTime newsletter. We've had an email newsletter to tens of thousands of Vermonters, which people want to get on that list. You can go to ltgov.vermont.gov. And I've traveled to every corner of the state, listening to people, talking to people in their rotary, in their chambers, and their community groups about the issues and concerns they have. From the water quality issues down in Bennington, where the companies polluted their water, and now the governor vetoed a bill to make them pay for monitoring those folks' health, to folks throughout the rural parts of our state and the struggling economy for farmers, particularly our dairy farmers. It's been a real pleasure and honor to serve as Lieutenant Governor. I certainly hope that I will give you another opportunity for the next 2 years to continue that work, bringing people together to create a positive vision for Vermont.
And Minority Leader Turner.
Thank you for having me here, Dave. The honor of being chair. Thank you, Dave. And I want to thank everyone for listening. I've lived in Vermont my whole life, 4th generation Vermonter. I've been a public servant nearly as long as that. As town manager, state rep, 35-year member of local fire, 10 years as smelter fire and rescue chief, and 13 years in the legislature, 7 as the minority leader. I've been on call for my community, and now I want to be on call for Vermont. I as your next Lieutenant Governor. Whether it's cost of childcare, housing, healthcare, or taxes and fees, Vermonters are struggling. We have a crisis on the front row. With Governor Scott at the helm, we've been able to make progress. But we have a lot more work to do. As your Lieutenant Governor, I will focus on the core issues of curbing our rising cost of living and bringing opportunity for jobs, education, and strong communities to all corners of the state. Throughout my career in public service, I focused on bringing people together and getting things done. That's our motto, getting stuff done. I'll bring the same spirit of collaboration to the Lieutenant Governor's office and serve all Vermonters equally. We're missing leaders who know how to collaborate under the where we're going, and we need to fix it. I'm confident that if we work together and focus on our key priorities, we can put our state on the path to prosperity. I would be humbled to have you support this election, and I'll be honored to be on call as your next Lieutenant Governor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank both candidates very much. Audience, you're welcome to give them a round of applause if you'd like at this moment. And there you go. And we're going to be back with after a brief break here on the Billy Graham Show on WDEV. Colin Mine and BT Digger and I will review some of what we heard. Once again.
Thank you.